Welcome back to the Postpartum Plan podcast. This podcast is designed to support and empower you through postpartum. Whether you're expecting, in the early postpartum days, or beyond, this space is for you. I'm your host, Madison Fugere, a dedicated postpartum doula and pediatric sleep consultant, striving to help parents feel confident and supported in their parenting journey. Each week, I'm sharing practical tips and expert advice to help you navigate all the postpartum things with confidence. Well, as much confidence as you can. Let's embark on this journey together, making your parenthood as serene and supportive as possible. Jenn is a Peabody, Massachusetts-based mom, newborn care specialist, doula, nanny, and child passenger safety technician. She's been working in childcare for over 12 years and has a bachelor's degree from Salem State University. Jenn enjoys spending time with her kids, who are 4 and 1 month old, and her partner, Courtney, and together they enjoy camping and going to the beach. Oh, it's been such good beach weather recently, except for the rain, though.
It's either beach weather or it's raining. There's no
right. Well, I'm excited to have you here. We were just talking about it, but it's kind of like a mashup between like a birth postpartum story episode and like a collaboration topic episode. So I really don't know how the conversation will take us, but we're gonna go for it. We're two people who like to talk, so we'll just go with it.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess we can start with, do you want to like tell everybody a bit about yourself? I guess on a personal side of things, because we're talking about, your personal life and whatnot, but also on like a business side of things, like what services do you have? Where do you help people? All of that stuff.
Awesome. Yes. So, my partner, Courtney, and I, like you said, live in Peabody. We have a 4-year-old little girl and a 1-month-old little girl. Something that I'm going to touch on today, hopefully, is our journey with induced lactation. So my fiance, Courtney, birthed our 2 children. And for our second child, I had decided that a good and interesting way to bond with our new baby would be to induce lactation, which means that even though I didn't give birth to her, I would also breastfeed her. I felt like as a doula, it was also an interesting perspective to have, because I can kind of offer that, that common denominator between me and breastfeeding clients. And also it just felt like something I was missing out on the first time around. So talking a little bit about that today, and then just overall postpartum experience as a non-gestational parent. I feel like things get a little messy in the 2-mom world.
Yeah.
It's just a little different, not in a bad way, just different.
Right. And I feel like it's probably kind of cool because like you can relate to like her side of things a lot more, and like can probably understand, I could understand to an extent what like hormones feel like, right? But it's also hard because you've never been in that place, is my understanding. So
yeah,
I'm sure it's like tricky, but also like kind of relatable, but also kind of tricky. Like so many feelings probably.
Yeah. It's very relatable and then also very isolating. What I've noticed the second time around is that there's not a lot of specific support for non-gestational parents. It's kind of niche and it's a little bit hard to come by. And I don't really relate with dads. If we're like using just, generalized terms, I don't relate with dads. And I don't relate with moms who gave birth. So it's kind of like I'm in that in between, especially adding in the induced lactation portion to it. It also kind of adds another layer of things. So it's just been an interesting and very humbling experience, even as a professional.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you said that with your first child that you didn't do this. So like, what was that experience like? And obviously don't touch on it if you don't want to, but like, I'd love to hear like from the start, like how did you guys decide who was going to carry? And then like, what was that experience like for you not being the one who was pregnant? And then like you said, it was a bit isolating. So I'd love to hear like about that.
Yeah. So my partner, Courtney, actually was a single mom by choice when we met. Was in the process of starting the single mom by choice journey. So we weren't officially together. But I've been in Chandler's life, our daughter, since the day she was born. I was with them in the hospital. And that's also another interesting part of our story. We kind of just it really worked for us, whatever we were doing. Like, we weren't friends and we weren't together, but all of a sudden we were just this family, and it was really nice. And it happened very organically. Um, and we're just so thankful that it happened, and it's been a great experience. But so for the first time, I was kind of just like, you know, an aunt. I was just around. I did a lot of kind of, I don't want to call it work, but I did spend a lot of overnights with Chandler. Um, and then all of a sudden we were living together, and then Courtney was always one and done. I knew in the future I wanted more children. And when we kind of started talking about how we had this family that happened very organically, we were, like, let's do this again. Like, let's go into this time expecting to be a family unit. Courtney's a little bit older than me. So it was decided pretty easily that she was going to carry this time around as well, just because her, after 40 fertility is kind of, it's a little trickier. And so we decided, because she was nearing that 40 mark and I'm in my 20s, that she would carry this time around. It was definitely challenging. She had hyperemesis. So there was a lot of, time spent in the hospital. There was a lot of, just hard times. It's very hard, and that's another thing that's quite isolating, having a partner that's sick. And, but then looking back, it brought us closer together. When you're in it, you're like, is this worth it? And I'm sure she feels like, she was sick all the time. She couldn't eat, she couldn't drink, she was in bed. Like, it was very, very hard. But we were talking to our midwife yesterday, and she said, if I could have at 26 weeks taken this little baby out and said, like, look at her now, like, is this worth it? We both would have said, of course.
Yeah.
But, we've learned to kind of reframe things. And I think in postpartum, it's hard to do, but you kind of have to just think about perspective. Like, it's really, really hard, but like, when we look back, we were like, okay, like, it was temporary, so we were okay. And now, like, even in this phase of life, we're like, this hard stuff is temporary, it's going to end soon. And then, you weirdly look back and you miss it. Even Courtney was saying the other day, she weirdly misses being pregnant, even though it was like such a hard experience. And she'll never do it again.
I would say, especially if she knows that that's something she's not doing again. I know that it can be such a bittersweet feeling. I've talked about it on a couple episodes, but specifically, I don't even remember what episode it was, but when Krista was on with me and we talked about like postpartum stuff, because I was like, there's just a huge ability to have two opposite feelings at the same time. And like, that's something that I think can be probably relatable to like anybody in any part of life, right? But yeah, like missing being pregnant, even though like it was a not so fun experience, can be two opposite things that you can feel at the same time. And like, you don't have to feel bad about that, right? It's such a weird thing, but it's life. It's crazy.
Yeah. And it's also, I think it's a little bit of like a grieving process, because it's part of your life experience that you're never going to get to do again. Even this newborn phase, you never truly know if you're going to have another baby, right? Like, in the perfect world, in a couple of years, I would carry another baby. And then I can come back on and talk about how that experience differs from this one.
Yeah.
But, even now we take everything day by day, and we're kind of like, is this it? Like, are we going to do this again? Are we going to have another baby? It's such a wild ride, you don't, and I say this to my clients as well, like, you just have to take it for what it is. No experience is going to be exactly the way you want it to be. But like I said before, the reframing is so important, because, you can really drive yourself crazy if things aren't going the way you want them to go.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, no, totally. And I think that, yeah, taking it day by day, because you don't know what's going to happen next. And as a family who has to go through fertility treatment to have a baby, I'm sure it's so financially a big toll too, that you might want to have a million children, but it might not be in the cards, and I mean, same for other families too. Infertility experiences happen, but with families that are same sex, it's like there's not really another option. So yeah
it was sorry, it was,
no, you're good.
It was interesting too, just learning about the fertility process for same-sex couples. Um, I'm sure as everyone listening knows, you can't just make a baby together.
Wouldn't that be easy? I've been seeing this
Yes.
TikTok trend of like people mixing their faces together to make what their babies would look like. And I'm like, oh, I was like, science is so mean to us. Genetics so mean.
Yes.
But yeah.
So in terms of like, first you have to pick a donor, if you're using a sperm donor, right? Some people choose to use family or some people choose to use, friends. But for us personally, we had to pick a donor. We are really fortunate that both our girls have the same donor. And I don't like to tell too much of her story because it's not mine to tell, but we do know a lot of our daughters have siblings. So we have, they have a family limit through the sperm bank, and we've actually been fortunate enough to connect with them via Facebook. So we have a very large extended donor sibling family, which is super cool. So it was important to us for both of our girls to have that connection and have those people in their lives as well. But then after you pick the sperm, you have to buy the sperm, you have to ship the sperm. It doesn't always work on the first try. You're tracking ovulation, you're tracking your cycle, and we're fortunate because it took 2 tries each time. So that's, we're super lucky, but each time is more money. And, for some people, what happens is they run out of money before they can even make a baby, which is so sad. And, hopefully in years to come, as things progress and science advances, it'll be easier and it'll be more accessible for people who need it. But for now, that's what we deal with. And yeah, it just is a process for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, 100% agreed. Now, when you guys decided to do this the second time around, you said that you kind of were like, let's take this opportunity to do something different. And that's when you kind of decided that you wanted to do this inducing lactation. Was there something that was it something you knew about that like you always had thought about, or like how did that thought come to be? And then how did you get to where you are? Like, did you have people that could help? Did you have like doctors, or were you just like researching the whole thing on your own?
So I can't remember how I came across it. And I want to say it was probably Facebook. I love a good Facebook group and I find them to be incredible resources, but you also have to tread lightly. So it's like finding that. I want to say it was maybe on like a LGBTQ parenting page where I saw that another couple had both breastfed their babies. And I was like, first of all, how, as a postpartum professional, do I not know that this is possible? And second of all, how do I do this myself? Because that's fascinating. And then, when there was a formula shortage during, COVID, I had heard about a lot of people relactating. And that's when I kind of really started delving into the research. So I personally followed what's called the Newman-Goldfarb protocol. It's one of the more widely recognized protocols. People tend to use this one first. It's a medicated protocol. So some people choose to do this kind of more the natural way where they do just herbs and pumping. I personally followed this protocol pretty much to a T until the baby was born, where I used birth control and then this medication called domperidone, which actually isn't available here in the US. So I had to buy it out of the country and ship it here. I worked with a lactation consultant named Joanna Becker. I want to say she's based in Virginia, but we met via Zoom, and she had worked with a couple clients who induced lactation, but there's not a ton of people who specialize in it, and there's not a ton of research on it. So it's very hard to find like concrete answers on things.
Right.
I'm very like science minded. So I like to hear like, this is what you do, this is when you do it, and this is going to be the result.
Yeah.
And, for me, it was a lot of like, okay, like I have to be flexible. I have to change my frame of mind. And also the whole protocol, you kind of have to go into it being like, this might not work, and that has to be okay. Because that's such a huge disappointment if it doesn't work. So I took the birth control pill for 7 months when Courtney was pregnant. and then stopped it abruptly. The whole time I was also taking domperidone, and I don't want to go into like dosage and stuff of that because you should obviously check with your doctor or the healthcare professional that you're working with. But I personally used it, took my medication, and then continued my medication after I stopped the birth control and started pumping every 2 hours, which is, again, another huge, barrier in time commitment, in financial commitment, because, I worked as a nanny. I was very fortunate that my bosses were flexible. I would pump in the car on the way to pickups. I would pump during nap time. I would pump on my way to and from work. I did my best to make it work. And I was very fortunate that it worked. I don't have a full supply. Before she was here, I was making about 5 ounces a day, which really isn't a ton. But, I'm very much in the frame of mind that, like, it's incredible that my body could do this at all. So super cool. And we were able to have a nice freezer stash when she was born. And now that she's here, we co-nurse. So, Courtney does majority of the breastfeeding. And then, several times a day, either at the beginning or the end of a feed, she'll also nurse for me. There are some times where she, I'll feed her and she falls asleep. So she, she's getting something from there. And then I still pump 4 times a day. So kind of a ton of moving parts, a ton of different things. And it was really hard to find people who had, similar experiences and, a similar relationship with 2 parents feeding the baby. And, it's just one of those things. If you're interested in it, like, I suggest you find someone who's done it. And I'm always willing to talk to people about it. But you just kind of have to make it work for you. The protocol says, like, after the baby is born, you need to keep pumping 8 times a day. And after you latch the baby, you need to pump. And, like, it's not realistic with a postpartum partner and a 2-day-old to be like, hold on, I need to pump for 20 minutes. You just have to figure out how to make it work for you and your family. I know some people whose partner didn't choose to breastfeed, just induced lactation, and they've been able to exclusively breastfeed. And I think, just like any breastfeeding journey, it's kind of supply and demand. So as long as you're bringing your baby to your breast, stimulating it, some people get a full supply, and that's also super cool. But also, like I said before, just kind of having that frame of mind that, like, anything you can provide is so amazing. And even if it doesn't work, you can comfort nurse. You have to think, like, there are other ways to bond with your baby. Like, this isn't the be all end all. And there have definitely been a couple times where I'm like, that's it, I quit because I'm not making enough milk for her. But then you reframe and you're like, it's cool that I can even do this, and she's getting what she needs, and that's enough.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've definitely heard of so many different families doing it. People that I know, people that I've seen online, whatever. Right. And exactly. The idea of, 2 nursing parents, or the idea of, one gives birth and one decides not to. I've also heard of people inducing lactation for if they're going through adoption and they want to, like, adopt a newborn baby. I mean, there are so many different things, and it's just such a cool thing that, like, you can kind of trick your body into almost. But whenever I see it, obviously it's like success stories, and I mean, I guess I never put enough brain power into it to think about the idea that, there's a probability that you could go through all of this, like, heavy work and not get the outcome you're looking for. And that can probably be, so tricky and so hard. And I don't know, I never really put my brain power together to think of that side of it, but I did it. But yeah.
And it's a slow process too. I mean, when I first started pumping, like, I hear of people, and I'm in a lot of the Facebook groups, which is where I got a big bulk of my information, because that seemed to be where the majority of people who have tried this are sharing their experiences, is on these Facebook groups. And there's also there's a book called Breastfeeding Without Birthing that a lot of people recommend. I got, like, halfway through it and I was like, this probably isn't for me. But a lot of people love that book. But yeah, I mean, I see people in those pages who pump for 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks and they get one drop of pump. And they keep at it and eventually they get something. And, sometimes they don't. For me, I was pretty fortunate because within the first week of pumping, I was already getting like a measurable amount of milk that I could save. Um, and I just had to keep thinking like it wasn't about the amount. It was about like my overall experience, how proud I was of myself and my body for being able to do this, and what I'm able to provide for my baby, being the non-gestational parent, and just how cool that was.
Right.
You know, we have like a decent freezer stash now, and I know like when we go back to work, it's going to be like a little bit of shuffling. Hopefully the baby will be able to come with us both to work at some point in time. But we definitely will be using that milk. And it's super cool to think like me as a non-birthing parent was able to like provide these bottles of milk for my baby. Um, and yeah, and it's also, you know, I'm not like a super, breastfeeding is great, but I'm also in the like formula was great. Our first
Right.
daughter was also supplemented with formula and that worked well for us. So, it's all about finding what works.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's so cool. Now, how has this like experience been for you, not just physically, but like emotionally? Do you feel like, not like we're gonna compare children, but do you feel like you get to be more like invested like in the kind of process because you're also nursing at times? Or, obviously again, we're not comparing children because that's not okay, but the emotional attachment has got to feel a little bit different when you're like actually nursing, or you've got to feel like such pride when like you're doing that.
It's just a cool feeling. I mean, like I said before, our family situation was a little bit different before. So, while, Chandler still calls me her mom and, she says like I have two moms and, on the paperwork and everything, like I am her parent. It felt different from the beginning with our baby's name is Elliot. With Elliot, just because, it felt like we both had a very equal part in it. And even at the beginning, it was really nice because, like, when they're in those first few days and they're cluster feeding and, Courtney was exhausted, it was like, okay, like, it's my turn. Like, I'll feed her now. And that was super cool. That was the first time that I really was like, wow, like, I really resonated with my mom title for Elliot.
Yeah.
Like, I felt like right away, just this immediate feeling of like, everything I did was worth it. All of that hard work, the pumping. I mean, I had pumped every 2 hours for 6 weeks.
And we're talking about round the clock too, right? Like you were pumping at night,
I did 1 to 2 pumps overnight.
Okay.
But minimally 8 times a day for 20 minutes. So I was literally tied to that pump. I was joking around calling it my husband. Because I was like, oh, here's my husband. And I still kind of call it that sometimes. But yeah, like it felt very worth it as soon as she latched on. And we were also fortunate because that's another thing that wasn't a guarantee. There was no guarantee that even after all this work that either one of us could have breastfed. She could have had, I mean, she does have a lip tie, but she still latches fairly well. And hopefully after she gets it revised, she will latch well still. But there was no guarantee that either one of us, she could have had allergies or ties or just some health condition preventing her from being able to breastfeed. And in that case, we both would have been in that same boat where we were discouraged about that experience. But it was luck. I mean, it worked out. She latches to both of us. Our breasts are very different sizes. So that was something that we were really concerned about.
That was something I literally just wrote down because I'm like, I'm going to forget questions. But one of them, like, does she have a preference? Like, people always say that, like, when you give baby a bottle, then they end up like having a preference of bottle over breast or something. But you have now 4 different boobs and bottles. So
yeah, I mean, I think at times she prefers Courtney just because she definitely has a larger supply than me, right?
Right.
But sometimes at night, if Courtney is like, I think she has a very healthy letdown Whereas I don't necessarily have that. And I do think sometimes even at night, like she's more apt to latch onto me and feed for longer than Courtney because she doesn't want that big feed. She's more of like comfort nursing at that time. And we also do bottles. We do 2 bottles a day. So like she's getting it from every end and she is a flexible girl. We're so lucky. But yeah, our breasts are very different sizes. Our flange sizes are very different. So like besides the fact that they are boobs, there is nothing the same about our boobs.
Right. And I'm sure that your bodies are naturally making like different like fat contents in your milk and like everything has got to be totally different. So whether it is that, you know, like you said, she's just super flexible or it just happens that like, I don't know, I feel like science is changing so much too. Like our like information is changing. I feel like I've been doing this full time for over a year now, being a postpartum doula, and so much has changed about like how milk comes in and, you know, this whole bottle over boob preference, which I feel like is now turning into more of like a flow preference thing which I think makes a lot more sense. And so there's always things changing that it makes me wonder. I'm like, okay, do babies really care or are they just more stubborn?
Yeah.
You know?
Yes.
It's so interesting. Now, the other question that I had as you were talking was I'd love to know what this was like. You know, obviously we don't have to get into like Courtney's side of things, but like when Elliot was born and you were in the hospital and all of this, or I'm assuming, did you have a hospital birth?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What was that like? How were people reactive? Like, obviously, you know, having same-sex families come in isn't, you know, unspoken of. We see them, but it's not as common, right? And then on top of it, to have you also being able to breastfeed, like, how did the hospital staff like think of that? What was your experience like in the hospital?
So my overall experience with medical providers throughout the process was a little challenging. Personally, my primary care doctor wouldn't even prescribe birth control for me for this because she felt like it was not in her scope. So I ended up going to Planned Parenthood and getting the birth control that I needed, and they were super supportive about it. The doctor that I saw through Planned Parenthood was super interested. She wanted to learn more about it. You know, it was great. She was fantastic. And then, you know, I had bounced back, my prescription ran out, and I said, let me just try my doctor again. And I got another doctor, and it was a male doctor, and he was kind of the first one to really discourage me on this journey. I was kind of nearing the end of, you know, I had been doing it for a while, hadn't started pumping yet. I think I needed like 1 more pack of birth control pills. And instead of paying out of pocket through Planned Parenthood, I was like, oh, let me go to my doctor. I've been on it for 6+ months. They'll just write a refill. And he was like, you know, this isn't going to work. That's using it off label and you shouldn't do that. You know, he's like, there's really no need for 2 parents to breastfeed. And it was very, very discouraging. And then I just kind of took a step back and I was like, I'm going to put my doula hat on for a second and be an advocate for myself here, and sent a long email with a bunch of research. And it was funny because a bunch of people that I told were like, oh, you should send him pictures of all your milk now.
Oh my gosh. Right. Here in your face.
But I felt like I was in like a position of power at that point in time to educate this person about that it does work. And even if it doesn't work, that's okay. And I'm in charge of my own body. So like if I want birth control, especially in this climate, you're going to give me a birth control prescription.
Right. And like, if you don't know the information, why are you just discouraging, right? Like, you know, the fact that you were able to be like, okay, let me put my doula hat on and like do this. Like, so many people that are going through this aren't doulas and they don't know that, or, you know, they don't know how to go about it. So like, props to you for trying to pave some paths.
So after that, my, you know, Courtney's midwife was super supportive about it. And she actually has a family member who did attempt to induce lactation. So she was super on board with it, and very supportive, and was very educated with the protocol. She saw the midwives at Mount Auburn, and they were just like so fantastic. Every single person that came in the room was super supportive, cheering us on. All the nurses there were great. Even, you know, in labor and delivery, we had kind of a long labor process. We chose to kind of do things slow. Courtney had an induction, and they brought in a fridge for my breast milk. They were just overall super supportive. The lactation consultant in the hospital was super supportive. And then we also have lactation consultant through our pediatrician, and our pediatrician and the lactation consultant there was super supportive. But I also think that we've created kind of a great group of people around us, like as a queer family. You have to find the right providers for your family as a whole, especially for your children, because you don't want anyone to ever, make them question their family and things like that. So, doing a lot of research about who we choose to see as providers. Once we had that crew in place, we knew that nobody would bat an eye. Right. And just the support, even yesterday at, our 6-week postpartum checkup, the midwife, checked in and was like, how's your, breastfeeding journey going? How are you feeling with it? How's it going? And that was really nice. It felt very inclusive. And, we're definitely very lucky. Our friends and family have been super supportive. Even my grandmother, who's like in her late 80s, was like, oh, I didn't know anyone could do that. And, we're very, very fortunate, specifically me, to have a bunch of cheerleaders.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I love that. And it really just shows that there are good people out there, right? Like if you're going through this and you might be expecting somebody or something that people aren't as accepting of it, there are providers out there. There are people out there that will listen and will support and understand what you're doing. So don't let that one person who's trying to tell you not to do something tell you not to do it.
And it was my understanding too that I actually, like, none of the nurses or anyone at Mount Auburn, I wasn't the first person that they had on as their patients that had a partner that induced lactation. They had all seen it before, which is super cool. That's awesome. And it makes me think that maybe they are like, they're very, the midwives at Mount Auburn do a lot of fertility. So I'm assuming they work with a lot of same-sex couples. Right. So I think that kind of all ties in together.
Yeah. Just to make it more known, more of like a common thing, right? I mean, people aren't going to know it exists if we don't talk about it and share about it and, aren't open about things. So, yeah, that's awesome. I appreciate it. If you were to give like people or somebody ideas or support or any other information that might want to go through this, do you have like any things like advice or, I mean, normally I ask people if they have their favorite advice and products for new parents, but I feel like the advice and product should be like, what helped you during all of this? Like, what's your favorite pump is the real question, right? Like,
I haven't found the perfect wearable for myself. So if anyone has any suggestions that they want to send my way, that would be great. But, I personally use the Spectra pump, and I would say, if someone is interested in doing this, look into those groups on Facebook. If you just search induced lactation, a bunch are going to come up. And then look at them and take everything with a grain of salt.
Right.
And then the CanadianBreastfeeding.org, they have it right on their website, the Newman-Goldthorpe protocol, and that they have medicated and unmedicated. They have accelerated and regular protocols. So, there's options, and they're pretty readily available. The information that I personally got from my lactation consultant was not much different than what was in those protocols.
Okay, that's awesome. That's great to know. Because like you said, it's we gotta get stuff out of the country. So I mean, if you're gonna get info, Canada's medical stuff I've heard has been pretty incredible. So
yeah. And the medication too, I'm not going to tell anyone where to get it because it's a little out of my scope, but right. In those groups, there's plenty of information on, if you feel like you need this medication to induce lactation, how to get it.
That's great to know. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it. And I hope that, yes, if you decide to have your more babies down the road, you can come back and tell us all about it.
Amazing. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning into the Postpartum Plan podcast. I hope that today's episode brought you support, relatability, and valuable insight. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a review and share with any of your prenatal and postpartum friends and family. Your feedback helps us reach more parents seeking support. And if you're looking for additional resources, please feel free to connect via Instagram at Serene Moments Doula for constant information, tips, and tricks, or check out my website, www.serenemomentsdoula.com. See you next week.